Welcome to Blitz Interviews. Like the game of chess, it's only lasts 10 minutes. I have a pleasure here to have Tim on the show, and we're going to talk about very exciting topic about CSPM, how basically I understand what's happening in my infrastructure as a service. Tim, tell me about the idea and why you're the guy that started this entire basically marketplace.
Totally. It's great to be here, and I'd love to tell you about this. So it's kind of funny how it came together. CSPM came together entirely because we got our butt kicked at Adobe trying to scale up in the cloud early in the era around 2011. And we rapidly went from nothing's going to be in the cloud to 500 plus Amazon accounts in the pre-Cloud Trail era. So there was no way to know who was doing what in the environments. And ultimately, we had developers who were leaving resources just fully wide open to the internet and unsecured. And then people were maliciously using those resources for fun and profit in the cloud in the early days of hacking the cloud. And so we figured out this had to stop. And the whole CSPM market was basically derived from a script that went to check a couple API settings for security in the public cloud as a way of us trying to understand what was happening in the environments.
So you saying that you didn't create a company, you solved the problem you need to be solved, and then basically become a company.
Exactly. When I left Adobe, one of the things that was the impetus for me leaving was knowing in 6 or 8 weeks of dedicated time, I could come back and solve the problem for people who looked like Adobe and did business like Adobe. We could never have done it while still there. And that was the reason I actually started a company, and we ended up creating a space because we were spending so much time trying just to respond to incidents and problems that we couldn't actually build a solution so we wouldn't have to respond to the problems.
So if I just woke up today and I have no idea what CSPM means, explain in an elevator pitch, why do I care and why it's important and why it's a very big chunk of our future in cybersecurity.
Yeah. To me, CSPM answers the question, how do I know what the state of security for my organization is when my environment is constantly changing, right? The promise of cloud's elasticity and scale. And if we embrace these programmatic behaviors, then we can't just run a singular once a year, once a quarter pen test or scan like we used to in the old days of security. And so we had to get closer to real time and understand as things change in the environment, we have to reassess security at every change. And it became increasingly important because it shifted the paradigm from people doing static annual security testing to always needing to know what their security was. And that bled over into the compliance world where it wasn't once a year audits. It was, I audit myself all year long. And instead of proving that I cleaned up before the auditor got here, I proved that I actually enforced this security program all year, every day, 24/7.
But it doesn't replace vulnerability management. It doesn't replace pen testing. It's on its own.
Yep. Some component of pen testing back in the day was like just testing firewall rules and looking at configurations and scanning operating systems and challenging the assertions you made and then going and breaking your application in code as well, right? And so we took that first half away so you could focus more on the application, because infrastructure as a service is all about you build your application and don't worry about infrastructure anymore.
When I first dipped my toes in CSPM, what I realized for myself is the amount of information, the amount of type of configuration in AWS, in Azure, in GCP, it's so vast that as a human being, there's just no way I will know everything, and there's no way I will not do finger typing or some kind of mistakes.
Yeah. I remember getting the first official Amazon API documentation, and it was somewhere around 800 to 1,000 pages. And we laughed and we said, no one's ever going to read all this when they're really focused on building like a website that helps rent apartments out or whatever it might be. And so there was no way for humans to keep up with it. And I think we did some math at one point where you would spend many people years worth of labor just doing daily auditing of an average size Amazon environment at the time, which wasn't nearly as big as it is today and didn't have, there's 25% of the services available back in that time that you can, versus what you can get today in Amazon. There's a service for everything.
And when you guys started, there was mainly EC2s. Now there is Lambdas, serverless, there is many containers, of course. There is much more configuration and many more options to check and where you potentially may have an error or mistake.
Yeah, the number of permutations, if you've ever taken a statistics class, is just off the charts at this point. And that's why I think we see some of this escalation as people are building much more sophisticated and much more robust CSPM technologies to try to keep up with what is the cloud arms race, where Microsoft, Google, Azure, and other providers are continuing to innovate and add lots of new services. And they are trying to keep it rational and under control of the organizations that want to use these services, because there's always this tug of war of, we want our developers and our engineers to be able to use the latest and greatest things that are being built by the cloud, but we also have to use it in a safe and sane way. And so there's this very interesting dynamic between the people who are trying to help everyone secure it and then the people who are building all these new infrastructure services at a breakneck speed.
Let's bring it from theoretical conversation to a practical conversation. Yeah. If I start a company tomorrow and I'm putting all my effort to create a product, and I'll say 99% of the companies starting right now are in the cloud. Do I want a CSPM tool already? Do I want to use the native capabilities right now that exist? Like, what would you guide people to do with all the knowledge you accumulated for the last 10 years?
I think a CSPM is a fantastic thing. And I think of it in this way. If you want to take care of your body and your health, you want to start with a program on day one and maintain it for your whole life, and you'll end up healthier in the long run. That's true of your infrastructure as you build it from ground up also. I was famous for saying where I was like, you don't eat cheeseburgers 364 days a year and then have a salad the day before your checkup with your doctor once a year and then get a clean bill of health. The same is true for how you build in the cloud. You want to start with really good, solid security fundamentals and foundations and have it automated from the beginning. So as it evolves over time, when you do make mistakes, because we're human and we will, it'll catch them and help you close those gaps before an attacker can use them against you. And it just gives you a better chance of creating success for your business and getting off the ground and not falling victim to a cyber attack that ends up, bankrupting or crippling the company.
What are the common things you saw when you started? Like the misconfiguration was very, very popular.
We saw a few. There was a lot of times where people were leaving databases wide open to the internet. And we saw some of these in the news and some not, where people would spin up early Mongo and things like that and just not lock them down, because the first goal was get it up and make it reachable and start working with it. And then, I'll lock it down later when it's time. And people started doing automated scans of the IP space of the cloud providers and finding those resources and attacking them in a day or two. The other big one was a lot of the S3 storage configuration mistakes. S3 was complicated early on, where you could have like a big hierarchy tree in buckets, and file 500,003 in bucket 12 was marked publicly accessible. But there's no way for you to know that because the top level bucket was not accessible. So you could actually expose things deep in a tree accidentally. And I actually had been involved in helping people respond to breaches because of that exact incident, where they've lost things like backups or PII or other, critical data that they just never want to lose. And they want to make sure that never happens again. Been involved in helping people respond to breaches because of that exact incident, where they've lost things like backups or PII or other, critical data that they just never want to lose. And they want to make sure that never happens again.
Our industry got hooked up to zero trust idea. It's been all over the news. And I believe at least, majority of the folks agrees that the identity part is key to zero trust. Mm-hmm. Now, identity and cloud also related, and I see many CSPM companies right now switch to the identity part as well to identify not just the problem with the resource, but also who it belongs to.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think the reason we do that is because when we kind of divided responsibility from like security people protect all the stuff, and then engineers just work with APIs and push code, to engineers and SREs are now building from, head to toe the entire infrastructure and application lifecycle for a company. There was a shift in the responsibility, right? That change in responsibility made the engineers accountable for all this, and we didn't equip them effectively to actually respond and deal with security in the cloud as part of their training when they came up to learn to write code and applications and stuff. And that was where the industry kind of fell off the rails in a way, and that CSPMs had to come in and save people's ability to migrate to the cloud by giving them the tools that they otherwise weren't given up front.
Tim, thank you very much. It was a pleasure and a lot of good information.
Thank you. Appreciate it. It's great being here.